The Blue Cross by G.K. Chesterton. Between the silver ribbon of a morning sky and the green, shimmering ribbon of the sea, the vessel touched the English shore and released a dark swarm of people upon the land. The man we shall follow did not stand out from the crowd. Indeed, he had no wish to do so. There was nothing remarkable about him, save perhaps for a festive elegance in his attire that seemed slightly at odds with the businesslike intensity of his gaze. His light gray frock coat, white waistcoat, and silver straw hat with a blue-gray band emphasized his swarthy complexion and the blackness of his imperial beard, which might have better suited the ruffs of Elizabethan times. The stranger smoked a cigar with the solemnity of an idler. No one would have guessed that beneath that gray coat lay a loaded revolver, beneath the white waistcoat a detective's badge, and under the straw hat the finest mind in Europe. This was Aristide Valentin himself, chief of the Paris police and the world's greatest detective. He had come from Brussels to capture the greatest criminal of the age. Flambeau was in England. The police of 3 nations had finally tracked him from Ghent to Brussels, and from Brussels to the Hook of Holland. They believed he would head for London, where a great Eucharistic Congress had gathered Catholic priests from all over. The perfect crowd for Flambeau to vanish in. Valentin did not yet know what disguise the man would choose, a minor church official or a bishop's secretary. No one ever knew for certain when it came to Flambeau. Many years had passed since this genius of theft had first startled the world, and as they said after the death of Roland, a great silence had fallen upon the earth. But in his best, or rather his worst, days, Flambeau was as famous as the Kaiser. Nearly every morning, newspapers reported that he had escaped justice for one crime by committing another, even more daring. He was a Gascon, exceptionally tall, powerful, and bold. Legends were told of his giant-like pranks, how he once stood an investigator on his head to clear his mind, or ran down the Rue de Rivoli with 2 policemen tucked under his arms. To his credit, he used his strength only for such bloodless, if humiliating, feats. He never murdered. He only stole, with ingenuity and on a grand scale. It was he who founded the famous Tyrolean dairy in London, which had no cows, no milkmaids, and no milk, yet served thousands of customers. He simply moved other people's milk cans to his clients' doors. Most of his schemes were disarmingly simple. It was said he once repainted the house numbers on an entire street overnight to lure someone into a trap. It was he who invented the portable pillar box, which he hung in quiet suburbs, hoping unsuspecting passers-by would drop in parcels or money. He was a magnificent acrobat. Despite his height, he could leap like a grasshopper and climb trees like a monkey. Valentin knew all too well that in this case, finding the criminal was only half the battle. But how to find him? That was the question occupying the mind of the famous detective. Flambeau masked himself skillfully, but one thing he could not hide was his enormous height. Had Valentin's sharp eyes caught sight of a tall fruit seller, a brawny grenadier, or even a stately duchess, he would have detained them instantly. But everyone he met resembled a disguised Flambeau, no more than a cat resembles a disguised giraffe. He had studied everyone on the boat. On the train, there were only 6. A sturdy railway worker heading for London, 3 short market gardeners who boarded at the 3rd station, a petite widow from an Essex village, and a very short priest from an Essex parish. When his gaze fell upon the priest, the detective shook his head and nearly laughed. The little cleric embodied the very essence of those dull plains. His eyes were as colorless as the North Sea, and his face reminded one of the Norfolk dumplings, as the locals were called. He was struggling hopelessly with several brown paper parcels. The church congress had evidently stirred many such priests from their rural slumber, blind and helpless as moles blinked out of the earth. Valentin, a true Frenchman and a stern skeptic, had little fondness for priests. Yet he felt a certain pity for this one. The man's large, old umbrella kept falling. He seemed not to know what to do with his ticket, and with a simplicity bordering on foolishness, he told everyone that he had to be careful because he was carrying a real silver thing with blue stones. This amusing blend of rustic dullness and holy simplicity entertained the detective throughout the journey. When the priest finally gathered his parcels, stepped out, and immediately returned for his umbrella, Valentin kindly advised him to stay quiet about the silver if he wanted to keep it. But regardless of whom Valentin spoke to, his eyes never stopped searching for a man over 6 feet tall. The famous criminal was 6 feet 4 inches. Nonetheless, as he arrived at Liverpool Street Station, he was certain he had not missed the thief. He visited Scotland Yard, gave his name, and arranged for assistance should he need it. Then, lighting a fresh cigar, he began to wander through London. While drifting through the streets and squares north of Victoria Station, he suddenly stopped. The square, small and clean, was struck by a sudden silence. London has such hidden corners. The stately houses surrounding it breathed prosperity, yet seemed uninhabited. In the center, like a lonely island in the Pacific, lay a green lawn fringed with shrubs. On one side, the houses rose higher, like a dais at the end of a hall, and their steady row was interrupted in a very London fashion by a restaurant front. This establishment looked as if it had wandered here from Soho. It was inviting, with trees in tubs and white blinds striped with lemon yellow. Valentin stood, smoked, and gazed at the striped blinds for a long time. The strangest thing about miracles is that they happen. Clouds gather into the unmistakable shape of a human eye. A tree bends into a perfect question mark just when you are lost. I have seen both recently. Nelson dies at the moment of victory. A man named Williams accidentally kills a man named Williamson. In short, life, like fairy tales, is full of coincidences, though prosaic people refuse to count them. As Edgar Allan Poe once remarked, wisdom must rely upon the unforeseen. Aristide Valentin was a true Frenchman, and the French mind is mind and nothing else. He was no thinking machine, for that phrase is a brainless child of our unwinged fatalism. A machine is a machine precisely because it cannot think. He was a thinking man, and he thought clearly and rationally. He owed his almost magic victories to hard work, to that simple and lucid French logic. The French do not startle the world with paradoxes, but with commonplaces. They give platitudes flesh and blood. Witness their revolution. Valentin knew what reason was, and therefore knew the limits of reason. Only one who knows nothing of motors will try to drive without petrol. Only one who knows nothing of reason will try to think without a solid, undeniable foundation. At this moment, there was no foundation. He had missed Flambeau in Norwich, and here in London, the man could wear any mask and beat anyone, from a hulking rag-and-bone man in Wimbledon to an athletic spendthrift in a metropole hotel. When Valentin knew nothing, he applied his method. He relied on the unforeseen. If he could not follow the path of reason, he meticulously and painstakingly acted contrary to reason. He did not go where he should, not to banks, police stations, or thieves' kitchens, but where he should not. He knocked on empty houses, turned into dead ends, scrambled down alleyways through mountains of refuse. went round every square, and doubled back on his trail. He explained his mad actions quite reasonably. If you have the key, he would say, you need not do this, but if you do not have the key, this is the only way. Any eccentricity that caught the detectives, I might also have caught the criminal's eye. One must begin somewhere. Why not begin where another might have stopped? In the steepness of the steps, in the quiet charm of the restaurant, there is something unusual. With the romantic instinct of a detective, Valentin felt that this was a place to pause. He ran up the steps, sat by the window, and ordered black coffee. It was late in the morning, and he had not yet breakfasted. The remnants of other people's meals on the tables reminded him that he was hungry. He ordered a boiled egg and abstractedly put sugar in his coffee while thinking of Flambeau. He remembered how Flambeau had escaped by using, in turn, scissors, a fire, and an unstamped letter, and how he once gathered a crowd to a telescope to watch an imaginary comet. Valentin believed himself no less clever than Flambeau, and he was right. But he well understood the disadvantages of his position. The criminal is the artist, the detective the critic, he said with a wry smile, lifting the cup to his lips and quickly setting it down. The coffee was salty. He looked at the small bowl from which he had taken the salt. It was a sugar bowl, intended for sugar, just as a bottle is intended for wine. He was surprised to find salt in the sugar bowl and looked to see if there was a salt cellar anywhere. Two stood on the table, full to the brim. Perhaps something was wrong with them, too? He tasted. They contained sugar. Then he cast a keen glance at the other tables. Had this exquisite joke, this swapping of salt and sugar, appeared anywhere else? Everything was neat and welcoming, except for a dark stain on the pale wallpaper. Valentin called the waiter. A disheveled and sleepy waiter approached the table, and the detective, who appreciated a simple, artless joke, asked him to taste the sugar and say if it matched the establishment's reputation. The waiter tasted, gasped, and was wide awake. "Is your humor always so refined?" Valentin asked. "Does this prank never grow tiresome for you?" When the irony reached the waiter, he stammered a profound assurance that neither he nor the proprietor had any thought of such a thing. They must have simply been mistaken. He took the sugar bowl and inspected it, took the salt cellar and inspected it, growing more and more astonished. Finally, he apologized quickly, ran off, and brought the proprietor. He too examined the sugar bowl and the salt cellar, and he too was astonished. Suddenly the waiter was choked with words. "I have an idea," he chattered. "I think it was those priests." "Those two," the waiter explained. "The ones who threw soup at the wall." "Threw soup at the wall?" repeated Valentin, thinking it might be some Italian proverb. "Yes, yes," said the waiter excitedly, pointing to the dark stain. "They just picked it up and splashed it." Valentin looked at the proprietor, who gave a more detailed report. "Yes, sir," he said. "That is what happened, though the sugar and salt have probably nothing to do with it. Very early, just as we opened the shutters, two priests came in and ordered broth. They seemed quiet, respectable people. The tall one paid and left, while the other gathered his bundles. He was somewhat clumsy. Then he also went towards the door and suddenly grabbed the cup and threw the soup at the wall. I was in the back room. I run out. I see. A stain and no priest. The loss is small, but what impudence. I ran after him, but did not catch him. They turned on a Carstairs Street. Valentin had already sprung up, put on his hat, and grasped his cane. He understood. In the darkness of ignorance, he had to go where the first signpost pointed, however strange it might be. Before the coins had settled on the table, before the glass door had slammed shut, the detective had already turned the corner and was running down the street. Fortunately, even in such desperate moments, he did not lose his cool sharpness. Running past a shop, he noticed something strange in it and went back. It was a greengrocer's. On the open stall, fruit and vegetables were displayed, with price tags sticking above them. In the largest compartments rose a pile of nuts and a pyramid of mandarins. The sign above the nuts, large blue letters on a piece of cardboard, announced, "Best mandarins." 2 for a penny. The sign above the mandarins, "Best Brazil nuts." 4 pence a pound. Valentin read it and thought that quite recently he had encountered a similar humor. Turning to the red-faced greengrocer, who was staring moodily into the distance, he drew his attention to the unfortunate error. The greengrocer did not reply, but immediately switched the tags. The detective, leaning carelessly on his cane, continued to scan the display. Finally, he asked, "Forgive my curiosity, sir, but might I ask you a question in the realm of experimental psychology and the association of ideas?" The purple greengrocer eyed him menacingly, but Valentin continued, cheerfully swinging his cane. "Why do shifted tags in a greengrocer's stall remind us of a priest arriving in London for the holidays? Or, if I'm not expressing myself clearly enough, why are nuts labeled mandarins mysteriously connected to 2 clerics, one taller and one shorter?" The greengrocer's eyes bulged out like a snail's eyes. It seemed he was on the point of lunging at the impudent man, but he growled angrily. "What business is it of yours? Maybe you are one of them? Well, you tell them straight. Priests or whatever, if they scatter my apples again, I'll break their bones." "Indeed," said the detective sympathetically. "They scattered your apples?" "It was that little one," said the greengrocer excitedly. "They rolled right across the street. While I was picking them up, he got away." "Which way?" asked Valentin. "Left, round the second corner. There's a square there," the greengrocer said quickly. "Thank you," said Valentin, and vanished like a fairy. Round the second corner to the left, he crossed the square and flung at a policeman. "Urgent business, constable. Have you seen 2 priests?" The policeman laughed with a deep bass. "I have," he said. "If you want to know, sir, one was drunk. He stood in the middle of the road, and—" "Which way did they go?" the detective asked sharply. "They took an omnibus," the policeman replied. "One of those yellow ones that go to Hampstead." Valentin pulled out a card, said quickly, "Send 2 men to follow me," and rushed forward so impetuously that the mighty policeman could not help but hasten to obey his command. A minute later, as the detective stood on the other side of the square, he was joined by an inspector and a man in plain clothes. "Well, sir," the inspector began with a grave smile, "how can we—" Valentin thrust his cane forward. "I will answer you on the top of that omnibus," he said, and plunged into the thick of the traffic. When all 3, panting heavily, were seated on the top of the yellow omnibus, the inspector said, "We could have got there 4 times as fast in a taxi." "Certainly," the leader agreed, "if we knew where we were going." "And where are we going?" the inspector asked, bewildered. Valentin smoked thoughtfully. Then, taking the cigar from his mouth, he said, "When you know what a criminal is doing, get ahead of him. But if you're only guessing, follow him. Wander where he wanders. Stop where he stops. Do not overtake him. Then you will see what he saw and do what he did. We have only one thing left, to notice anything strange." "Of what kind exactly?" asked the inspector. "Any kind," Valentin replied, and fell into a long silence. The yellow omnibus crawled through the northern part of London. It seemed as if hours had passed. The great detective explained nothing. His assistants remained silent, and doubt grew within them. Perhaps hunger grew in them as well. The time for a late lunch had long since passed, and the long streets of the northern quarters stretched out one after another, like the joints of some monstrous telescope. We all remember such journeys. One feels the edge of the world is about to appear, but only Tuffnell Park shows itself. London vanished, crumbling into grimy shacks, taverns, and wretched wasteland, only to reappear in the lights of wide streets and fashionable hotels. It felt like traveling through 13 cities. Ahead, a cold dusk was thickening, but the detective remained silent and motionless, peering intently at the flickering streets. When Camden Town was left behind, the policemen were already nodding off. Suddenly they started. Valentin leaped up, grabbed them by the shoulders, and shouted to the driver to stop. In utter bewilderment, they tumbled down the steps and, looking around, saw Valentin pointing triumphantly to a large window on their left. This window adorned the glittering facade of a hotel as grand as a palace. It was a restaurant dining room, as the sign announced. All the windows in the building were made of frosted, patterned glass, but in the middle of this window, like stars in ice, there gaped a hole. At last, Valentin cried, brandishing his cane. A broken window. There is the clue. What window? What clue? The policeman snapped. What proof have you that this has anything to do with us? In his exasperation, Valentin almost broke his bamboo cane. Proof, he cried. Oh, heavens! He seeks proof. Most likely it has nothing to do with us at all. But what else is there to do? Have you not realized that we must catch at any chance, however incredible, or go to bed? He burst into the restaurant. The policeman followed him. All three sat at a table and began a late breakfast, glancing every now and then at the star in the glass. It must be said, even now it explained very little. I see you have a broken window, Valentin said to the waiter as he was paying. Yes, sir, the waiter replied, busily counting the money. The tip was a generous one, and as he straightened up, he clearly brightened. That's just it, sir, he said. Quite a business, sir. And what was that? The detective asked carelessly. 2 priests came in here, the waiter related. There are a lot of them about now. While they had their breakfast, one paid and went out. The other was fumbling about. I looked. The breakfast was cheap enough, but they paid nearly 4 times the amount. I said, You've given too much, and he stopped at the door and said quite calmly, Really? I took the bill to show him, and I nearly fell over. Why? Asked the detective. I'd have sworn on anything the bill was 4 shillings. And there I looked, and it was 14, as sure as you're born. Right, cried Valentin, slowly rising to his feet. His eyes were burning. And he stands there in the doorway and says, I beg your pardon, I got confused. Well, that will be for the window. What window? I say. The one I'm going to break, and crash went his umbrella. The listeners cried out. The inspector asked quietly, Are we chasing a madman? The waiter continued, relishing the funny story. I just sat there, not understanding a thing. And he caught up with the tall one. They turned the corner, and how they ran down Bullock Street. I was after them as fast as I could go, but it was no use. They were gone. Bullock Street, shouted the detective, and dashed down the street as impetuously as the mysterious pair he was pursuing. Now the pursuers walked quickly between blank brick walls, as if through a tunnel. There were few lamps or lit windows here. It seemed as if the whole world had turned its back on them. The twilight was deepening, and even for a London policeman, it was not easy to understand where they were hurrying. The inspector, however, had no doubt that sooner or later they would come out to Hampstead Heath. Suddenly, in the blue gloom, Like a porthole, a convex lighted window gleamed, and Valentine stopped a step away from a small shop where sweets were sold. After a second's hesitation, he plunged into the colorful world of the confectionery, went to the counter, and with all gravity selected 13 chocolate cigars. He was considering how to approach the matter, but he did not need to. A bony woman, looking old though she was not, stared with dull surprise at the elegant newcomer. But seeing the blue uniform of the inspector at the door, she recovered and spoke. "You'll be after the parcel, I suppose?" she asked. "I've sent it off." "The parcel," Valentine repeated. It was his turn to be surprised. "Well, the gentleman left it, a priest, I think." "For heaven's sake!" Valentine cried, leaning forward. His ardent impatience finally broke through. "For heaven's sake, tell me the details." "Well," the woman began somewhat uncertainly, "two priests came in here about half an hour ago. They bought some peppermint lozenges, talked about this and that, and went towards the heath. Suddenly one comes running back. 'Did I leave a parcel?' I looked here and there. It wasn't anywhere. Then he says, 'Never mind. If you find it, send it to this address.' And he gave me the address and a shilling for the trouble. I thought I'd searched everywhere, but when he'd gone, look, there was the parcel. So I sent it off. I don't remember exactly where, somewhere in Westminster. And just now I thought, there must be something important in that parcel. That's why the police have come for it." "That's right," Valentine said quickly. "Is the heath near here?" "Straight on for about 15 minutes, the woman said. "You'll come right to the gates." Valentine dashed out of the shop and flew forward. The policeman followed him at a reluctant trot. The narrow streets of the suburb lay in the shadow of the houses, and when they emerged onto a wide wasteland under the open sky, the pursuers were surprised to find the twilight still so translucent and bright. The rounded dome of the blue-green sky glowed with gold between the black trunks and in the deep violet distance. The green, luminous dusk was thickening fast, and rare crystals of stars began to pierce the sky. The last ray of the sun shimmered like gold on the crests of the hills crowning that favorite haunt of Londoners known as the Vale of Health. Idle citizens had not yet quite dispersed. Blurred silhouettes of couples darkened the benches, and somewhere in the distance, girls shrieked on the swings. The majesty of the heavens overshadowed, with deepening blue, the majesty of human commonplace. And looking down upon the heath, Valentine finally saw what he was looking for. In the distance, couples blackened and parted. One of them was blacker than all and stayed together. Two men in black cassocks were walking away into the distance. They were no larger than beetles, but Valentine saw that one was much shorter than the other. The tall one walked with a humble and dignified gait, as become the learned cleric, but it was clear that he was over 6 feet tall. Valentine set his teeth and charged down, swinging his cane fiercely. When the distance closed and the two in black became as clearly visible as if under a microscope, he noticed one more oddity, which both surprised and did not surprise him. Whoever the tall one might be, Valentine recognized the little one. It was his fellow passenger from the train compartment, the clumsy priest from Essex, whom he had advised to look better after his parcels. So far, everything matched. The detective had been told that a certain Brown from Essex was bringing to London a silver cross encrusted with sapphires, a precious relic to be shown to the foreign clergy. This was, of course, the silver thing with blue stones, and Brown was undoubtedly that bungler from the train. What Valentine had found out, Flambeau could perfectly well find out too. Flambeau found out everything. Naturally, having caught wind of the cross, Flambeau wanted to steal it. It was as easy as could be. And it was quite natural that Flambeau had easily made a fool of the priest with the parcels and the umbrella. Such a sheep could be led by anyone even to the North Pole. So for Flambeau, a brilliant actor, it was nothing to lure him to this heath. So far, all was clear. The detective felt sorry for the helpless priest and almost despised Flambeau for stooping to such a gullible victim. But what did the strange events that led to his own victory mean? No matter how he thought, no matter how he struggled, there was no sense in them. Where was the connection between the theft of the cross and the soup stain on the wallpaper? The switch price tags? The paying in advance for a broken window? He had reached the end of the road, but he had missed the middle. Sometimes, though rarely, Valentin missed the criminal, but he always found the clue. Now he had caught the criminal, but he had no clue. The priest crawled up the green slope of the hill like black flies. By all appearances, they were conversing and did not notice where they were going, but they were headed for the wildest and quietest corner of the heath. The pursuers had to adopt those undignified postures that a hunter assumes when stalking prey. They ran from tree to tree, lurked, and even crawled through the thick grass. Thanks to these clumsy maneuvers, the hunters got quite close to the prey and could already hear voices, but they could not distinguish words, except for the word reason, which a high, childlike voice repeated time and again. Suddenly their path was blocked by thickets above a precipice. The detectives lost the trail and wandered for about 10 minutes until, rounding the crest of a hill as round as a dome, they saw in the rays of the sunset a lovely and peaceful picture. Under a tree stood a dilapidated bench. On it sat the priests in serious conversation. Green and gold still flickered at the darkening horizon. The blue-green dome of the sky was becoming green-blue, and the stars sparkled brightly, like large diamonds. Valentin signaled to his assistants, crept up to a large branching tree, and standing there in complete silence, finally heard what the strange clergymen were saying. He listened for a minute or two, and a demon of doubt seized him. What if he had dragged the English policeman to the far corner of a darkening park for nothing? The priests were conversing exactly as priests should, piously, gravely, and learnedly about the most ethereal mysteries of theology. The little father from Essex spoke more simply, his round face turned toward the brightening stars. The tall one sat with his head bowed, as if he felt unworthy to look at them. Their conversation was more innocent than innocence. Nothing more sublime could be heard in a white Italian cloister or a black Spanish cathedral. The first thing to reach them was the voice of Father Brown, what the medieval scholastics meant when they spoke of the incorruptibility of the heavens. The tall priest nodded with his bowed head. Yes, he said, the godless now appeal to reason. Who, looking at these myriads of worlds, would not feel that they're above us? There may be universes where reason is unreasonable. No, said Father Brown. Reason is reasonable everywhere. The tall one raised a stern face to the star-studded sky. Who can know if there is in the boundless universe? He began again. It has no spatial boundaries, said the little one, turning sharply to him, but it does not go beyond the boundaries of moral laws. Valentin sat behind the tree, silently biting his nails. It seemed to him that the English detectives were snickering at him. After all, it was he who had dragged them all this way to listen to the philosophical nonsense of two quiet elderly priests. In his anger, he missed the tall one's reply and heard only Father Brown. Truth and reason reign on the most distant, the most desolate star. Look at the stars. Truly, are they not like diamonds, and sapphires? Well then, imagine any plants and stones. Imagine diamond forests with brilliant leaves. Imagine that the moon is blue, a single enormous sapphire. But do not think that any of this will change the law of reason and justice by one iota. On opal plains, among pearl cliffs, you will find the very same commandment. Thou shalt not steal. Valentin was about to stand up. His whole body was cramped, and leave quietly. For the first time in his life, he had made such a fool of himself. But the tall one was silent in a strange way, and the detective listened. At last, the man said quite simply, bowing his head even lower and folding his hands on his knees, "And yet I think that other worlds may rise above our reason. Inscrutable is the mystery of the heavens, and I bow my head." And without raising his head, without changing his intonation, he added, "Come, give me that cross. We are alone here, and I can pull you apart like a straw doll." Because he did not change either his posture or his tone, these words sounded even more terrible. But the guardian of the relic hardly moved. His foolish face was turned toward the stars. Perhaps he did not understand, or perhaps he was petrified with fear. "Yes," the tall one said just as quietly. "Yes, I am Flambeau." He paused and added, "Well, will you give up the cross?" "No," said Brown, and the monosyllabic word rang out strangely in the silence. At that, Flambeau's mask of humility dropped away. The master thief leaned back on the bench and laughed, low but harshly. "You won't give it up," he said. "As if you could, as if you would ever give it to me, you celibate simpleton. And do you know why? Because it is already in my pocket." The little country priest turned his face toward him. Even in the dusk, one could see how bewildered he looked, and asked, with a flutter of timid anxiety like a subordinate, Are you sure?" Flambeau roared with delight. "Well, you're a natural at this," he shouted. "Yes, my venerable turnip, I am sure. I had the sense to make a duplicate brown paper parcel. So now you have the paper, and I have the jewels. It's an old trick, Father Brown, a very old trick." "Yes," said Father Brown, smoothing his hair with that same odd, shy gesture. "I have heard of it." The king of criminals leaned toward him with a sudden prick of interest. "You? From whom could you have heard of it?" "I'm not at liberty to tell you his name," said Brown simply. "You see, he was a penitent. He had lived by it for 20 years, switching parcels and bundles. And so, when I began to suspect you, I remembered that poor fellow." "Suspect me?" repeated the criminal. "Did you actually realize I wasn't leading you into this wilderness for nothing?" "Oh, yes," said Brown apologetically. "I suspected you from the start. You see, you have a slight deformity on your wrist that comes from the use of handcuffs." "Oh, damn it," yelled Flambeau. "How do you know about handcuffs?" "From my parishioners," replied Brown, mildly raising his eyebrows. "When I served in Hartlepool, there were 2 men with such marks on their hands. So I suspected you, and I decided, you see, to save the cross. You must forgive me, but I watched you. Eventually, I noticed that you had swapped the parcels. Well, I swapped them back again and sent the real one away." "Sent it away?" repeated Flambeau, and for the first time, his voice lost its note of triumph. "Yes, I sent it," the priest continued calmly. "I went back into the shop and asked if I had left a parcel. I gave them an address where it should be sent if it were found. Of course, I hadn't left it at first, but then I did. And the woman didn't run after me. She sent it straight to Westminster, to a friend of mine. I learned that from that poor fellow, too. He used to do that with bags he stole at railway stations. He is in a monastery now. You see, one learns a great deal in this life," he finished, scratching behind his ear guiltily. What are we priests to do? People come to us and tell us things. Flambeau had already ripped the parcel from his inner pocket and was tearing it to shreds. There was nothing inside but paper and bits of lead. Then he sprang to his feet, waving a huge arm, and shouted, "I don't believe it. I don't believe a turnip like you could pull this off. You have a cross. If you don't give it to me, I'll take it. We are alone." "No," Father Brown said simply, standing up as well. "You won't take it. First, because it really isn't here. And second, because we're not alone." Flambeau froze in his tracks. "Behind that tree," said Father Brown, "are two strong policemen and the greatest detective in the world. You might ask why they came here. I brought them." "How?" "Well, I'll tell you if you like. Lord, when you work in the slums, you have to know a lot of such tricks. You see, I wasn't sure you were a thief, and I didn't want to insult a brother priest. So I began to test you. When a man is given salted coffee, he usually gets angry. If he endures it, it means he is afraid of giving himself away. I put salt in the sugar bowl and sugar in the salt cellar, and you endured it. When a bill is much higher than it should be, it naturally causes surprise. If a man pays it regardless, it means he wants to avoid a scene. I added a 1 to the bill, and you paid it." It seemed Flambeau was about to spring on him like a tiger. But the thief stood as if enchanted. He wanted to understand. "Well," Father Brown explained with heavy-footed thoroughness, "you weren't leaving any tracks. Someone had to leave them. Everywhere we went, I did something to make people talk about us all day. I did no great harm. Splashed some soup on a wall, spilled some apples, broke a window, but I saved the cross. It is in Westminster now. It's a pity you didn't use the donkey whistle." "What didn't I do?" "I'm so glad you haven't heard of it," the priest beamed. "It's a nasty thing. I knew you wouldn't stoop that low. Even with the stains, I might not have managed. I'm a bit weak in the knees." "What are you talking about?" asked Flambeau. "Oh, I thought you'd know about the stains." Brown said happily, "It means you aren't quite corrupted yet." "And how do you know all this filth?" cried Flambeau. "Perhaps because I am a celibate simpleton," said Brown. "Has it never occurred to you that a man who spends his time listening to sins must know a little about worldly evil? To be sure, it was not only the practice but the theory of my work that helped me realize you weren't a priest." "What theory?" asked the exhausted Flambeau. "You attacked reason," replied Brown. "That is bad theology." He turned to pick up his things, and 3 figures emerged from behind the trees in the twilight. Flambeau was a man of talent and knew the rules of the game. He stepped back and bowed low to Valentin. "Do not bow to me, mon ami," said Valentin in his silver-clear voice. "Let us both bow to the one who has surpassed us." And they stood there, heads bared, while the little country priest fumbled in the darkness, trying to find his umbrella.